we'll get started here. Okay, everyone, welcome to the Tinnitus Relief Summit. My name is Dr. Ben Thompson, audiologist. I am your host, and I'm proud to announce Dr. Dirk de Ridder, the Belgian neurosurgeon and a professional who's passionate about helping the tinnitus community. Today's presentation will be on the pathophysiology of tinnitus, as well as different treatments that are available. Dr. de Ridder is a professor of neurosurgery at the University of Otago in New Zealand. He spends half of his time in New Zealand and other time in Belgium, and he has a dedicated neuromodulation clinic. And I'm very excited to welcome him to the Tinnitus Relief Summit. Dr. de Ridder, you can present for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll have some time for some question and answer that come from the presentation. So the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Ben. So good day, everybody. Basically, when you try and treat tinnitus, you have to understand the pathophysiology. The problem, however, is that the pathophysiology changes in time. And when the pathophysiology changes, or the way clinicians think tinnitus is being generated, then, of course, your treatments are being adjusted. And I just want to give you a quick overview that if you want to treat patients with tinnitus or any other disorder, then you have to follow a certain philosophy about the mechanism of action and also about how you're going to attack the problem. And if you talk about attack, of course, in the US, you all know the war on drugs. And unfortunately, in Europe, we're now encountering a war as well in Ukraine and Russia. And what we know is that if you want to attack a other country or a disorder, then maybe it's a good option not to only use naval force or air force or the army or the land force, but that you might want to combine the forces that you have available in order to attack the enemy, whether that is a country or a brain-related disorder. So now we can learn quite a bit from AIDS. And in the 1980s, when AIDS was discovered, fairly recently afterwards, what people found is that they found a drug called zidovudine, and people lived longer when they took the drug. However, they only lived for about 5 years after taking the medication, and then unfortunately it stopped working. A couple of years later, they said, well, we will add a second drug, and then people lived for a longer time, and a third drug was added, and a fourth drug, and what we now see is that people with AIDS actually live as long as you and I. Now, what's important about this is that it's the combination of different mechanisms of action that attack the virus or prevent the virus from procreating that cures the problem. Basically, it means just like you have in the Army, Air Force, Navy, and Land Force, that when you combine different mechanisms of action to treat a problem, you have a higher chance of success. So this is also one of the reasons why, unfortunately, with current treatments and current research, we haven't been very successful, because when we started our research about 20 years ago, we were thinking unimodally. So we would do a test with TMS, as you can see here, or we would do a test with, so TMS is a non-surgical neuromodulation technique that stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation. So basically you use magnetic pulses that target auditory cortex, for example, in the hypothesis that tinnitus is generated in the auditory cortex. Or we would do a study using transcranial direct current stimulation, which is a form of electrical stimulation where the electricity is sent through the brain or specific areas of the brain. Or we would do neurofeedback, but it was always one thing at a time. We wanted to understand can we treat somebody with tinnitus with only TMS, with only TDCS, only TACS, etc.? Or we would do a medication study where we would test one drug at a time. We would test, for example, whether anti-epileptic drugs like Tegretol would work, or medications that work on your dopamine receptor or serotonin receptor, etc. So it was only one single medication tested at a time, and that's because of scientific limitations. Or we would do an auditory stimulation study where we tested whether if we fill up the auditory gap with extra sounds by listening to music, that would improve the tinnitus. And unfortunately, all these unimodal single approach treatments don't really work very well. So then we said, well, we have to reconsider the mechanism, the pathophysiology of tinnitus. And the idea initially was very simple. Tinnitus comes from the ear, so we treat the ear, which is logical. You use hearing aids. And then we said, well, tinnitus might also be related to the auditory cortex. So we started targeting the auditory cortex with transcranial magnetic stimulation, transcranial electrical stimulation. And that also did not work sufficiently well. So then we said, well, we have to test the brain chemically, because the brain is both electrical and chemical. So we'll test all these different drugs. Now, considering the way an army functions, then we said, well, maybe we should combine different approaches. And there has been recent studies that show that if you combine transcranial magnetic stimulation plus transcranial alternating current stimulation, the efficacy is better. It works better than just doing one of the two. Or you create a cocktail of different medications where you strengthen serotonin, you block dopamine and noradrenaline, etc., to create a better clinical effect. This is what is currently being investigated, but considering the approach of the Army, actually what we should move to, and this I think is the most important part, is where we combine not just different medications, but where we combine neuromodulation, for example, transcranial magnetic stimulation and transcranial direct current stimulation, doesn't really matter, with medication. And the philosophy there is that of course, the brain works both electrically and chemically, that we attack both components of the brain that are involved in tinnitus. And secondly, the idea, of course, is different, where you could use certain drugs, which you could call medication as well, like, for example, psychedelics, where you first disrupt all the abnormal connections in your brain that we know were related to tinnitus. And then once they're all disconnected, which of course causes the psychedelic experience, then you rebuild the connections by using neuromodulation. So there is also another logic where you sequentially use them, for example, neuromodulation and medication, but you can also use sound therapy and medication. And what we will try in the near future is use MDMA or ecstasy combined with presenting tinnitus sounds. And this is based on a treatment which we know for post-traumatic stress disorder, where if patients go into psychotherapy while taking MDMA, that results in a way better response than only psychotherapy alone. So the combination, again, being multimodal, seems to be better, and hopefully the same will hold for tinnitus. We will do the same thing where we combine sound therapy with neuromodulation. You might have heard about bimodal stimulation, and in bimodal stimulation, you combine tongue stimulation, for example, with auditory stimulation, or you combine auditory stimulation with neck stimulation. That is one option. The approach we want to take is slightly different. We want to stimulate the vagal nerve in combination with sound therapy. Basically, considering your brain has two modes of functioning. One is where it goes in fight and flight mode, which is unfortunately one of the dominant problems in patients with tinnitus, or it goes to a rest and digest mode. Now, the rest and digest mode is controlled largely by the vagal nerve. And what we want to do is we want to combine auditory stimulation of the tinnitus sound with simultaneous vagal nerve stimulation that should get a signal to your brain that the sound is not important, because the brain receives rest and digest signal together with the tinnitus sound, and therefore it might, at least theoretically, remove it from consciousness, just like we don't feel our clothes because our clothes don't have any value, don't have any meaning, and therefore our brain does not push the sensation of our clothes to the level of consciousness. But of course, in the future, we might actually have to resort to combining sound therapy plus medication plus neuromodulation, just like a normal army functions in order to attack an enemy. Now you can say, well, all of this looks very nice from a theoretical perspective, and there might be some support to do that. For example, we know that transcranial magnetic stimulation combined with specific medications increase the effect in depression. Hasn't been shown yet for tinnitus, but we know it from other pathologies. But how do you turn these philosophical ideas into clinical reality? And this is why we create what's called the Brain Clinic. And so it's an international research unit where we all use similar tools, try to collaborate in different groups. And then whenever we've shown something might benefit, we translate it into a tinnitus neuromodulation clinic, which we have in Belgium. So the idea is that actually clinics, the clinical problem that we encounter in our patients informs the research, and the research try to find solutions that then again are being brought to the clinics. And this might be actually the fastest way forward, because if you only do research and stay in your ivory tower, then some brilliant ideas might never be brought to the people who need it. And if you only do clinical research, and if you do only clinics, but you don't engage in research, then you're limited to what is currently available. So the interaction between clinicians and researchers, or clinician researchers, whichever way you want to call them, is probably very relevant. And because, like in an army, you need to attack the tinnitus problem from a different components, from the auditory component, so the peripheral component, being audiologists and ENT surgeons, and combining that with people who are more focusing on the brain, like psychologists, neurologists, psychiatrists, neurosurgeons. It's the interaction that is critically important, and you have to bring those to the clinic as well. But of course, if you want to develop new treatments, you have to collaborate with engineers or companies who can help you then create new devices or create new tools that can benefit ultimately the research, but also the people in the clinic. And so from a very practical point of view, what you do need to do is have a research component and a clinical component that can collaborate together, and where the current pathophysiological understanding of the brain, which is changing constantly, is being adapted towards a new clinic. And so from a practical point of view, we know that the pathophysiology has changed from a predominantly ear-focused to auditory cortex to a brain network, but now we have to move from the simple brain network to the multimodal network, which involves both chemistry and electricity and auditory input. And with that, I've probably been still being a little bit vague on specific treatments, but as you can imagine, the combination of all these different components that we already have that might be only slightly successful when used individually could become a lot more successful when we try and combine all of that. So what I hope that clinicians will start doing is to move from a single unimodal treatment to multimodal treatment by combining whatever is being published already into in a rational way. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions that are related to this short overview of how, philosophically speaking, the clinic can be combined with research.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. De Ritter. And for all of us who are watching, 265 of us here live on the Tinnitus Relief Summit, say thank you. Let's ask the first question, which is coming from Najeen, which asks about medications. What is your opinion on medications and their interactions with the brain and how that can be useful for someone with tinnitus?
That's a very good and very relevant question. Currently, there is not one single medication that is neither FDA nor CE approved for tinnitus. So whatever we have to prescribe is off-label. But of course, we know that tinnitus often has comorbidities because people come to see a clinician because they suffer from the tinnitus. So some of the medications can benefit. And so if somebody comes to the clinic and says, well, the tinnitus is loud and it's dominantly present for a big part of the day, let's say more than 60% of the day, then that causes a disability, which you can try and treat by reducing the focus on the sound that the brain has, because the brain attaches a paradoxical, an abnormal salience or relevance to that sound. So you can try and block that by blocking specific dopamine D1 receptors, but then the problem is that might cause some side effects, so you have to compensate that by adding another drug. So when I start with medication, if that's necessary at all, then we usually combine Deanxit with clonazepam and aripiprazole, because it's a combination that works on all the receptors that we know are involved in the generation of tinnitus. So it blocks dopaminergic receptors, it blocks the noradrenergic receptors, so it blocks the fight response that the brain has. It accentuates some of the serotonergic receptors, which we know are involved in the rest and digest approach. And if that does not work enough, then depending on other symptoms, we might add a low dose of naltrexone. If there's more sleep problems, we might add a little bit of clonidine, which is actually an antihypertensive, but can also improve that. But the problem is that this is the clinics. From a scientific point of view, it's very difficult to do a research project where you combine all these medications. If somebody has, for example, tinnitus that's really worsening with specific head and neck movements or jaw movements, then we might add cyclobenzaprine, which is a muscle relaxant that has also been shown to reduce the tinnitus. So it really depends on the individual, but it's always a cocktail. We never give a single medication, but if you give a cocktail, you have to give extremely low doses so you don't get a side effect, because of course you don't want to turn one problem, let's say the tinnitus, into somebody who walks around like a zombie where the problem is equally bad as a tinnitus. So they're all extremely low doses, but it's a cocktail that we see that seems to be working and that we should investigate scientifically, but it's based on the same philosophy.
Excellent. We have a few more questions, so let's go lightning round on this. First question here is coming from both Melinda and Arturo. When do you think a combined treatment of neuromodulation and sound therapy is available, or is it currently available?
Yes, so there is already one, at least in certain parts of the world, a neuromod is already available where you use tongue stimulation combined with auditory stimulation. You cannot prescribe that to everybody, because the problem with the studies that have been done is that it does not seem to reduce the loudness of the sound. It does seem to improve how much it bothers. So if a patient says, I want my tinnitus loudness to drop down, then this is probably not a good idea, because we know from studies that for the majority of patients that does not happen. But if the patient says, well, I have the tinnitus is acceptably loud, but it bothers me a lot, then potentially these could be a patient. However, it has not been shown yet that the effect of this multimodal approach for this specific treatment is better than just sound therapy or just tongue stimulation. So even though philosophically and conceptually it's a good idea, the multimodal treatments are just starting. Susan Shore in the US is also doing a trial, but then more with C2 stimulation and auditory stimulation, but this is not yet commercially available. We will see more of these coming in the future, and I think that's very good. But as we speak now, there is only one form which is available, which seems to improve the bother of the tinnitus, but unfortunately not the loudness.
Thank you. And a follow-up question to that is, when these newer developments are available, what do you expect for the timeline of that treatment, the recommended usage? For example, having one-on-one coaching or therapy, those are individual sessions that takes time. Using devices for tinnitus retraining or sound therapy, you use those devices and you use them throughout your day. What may someone expect in terms of the actual course of a treatment with the combination of neuromodulation and sound therapy?
Yes, so normally it takes a while for the brain before things get a little bit more hardwired than, so brain plasticity consists of different time periods. You've got the immediate effect, you've got a little bit of a delayed effect of a couple of weeks, and then before it gets, well, of course, nothing really gets hardwired, but before it becomes more stably reset, that takes about 3 months. And in our clinic, what we do is we combine medication and neuromodulation for 3 months. And then we don't stop it all at once, because you might get a rebound, but we taper off the medication, we taper off the stimulation. Of course, what you want in the future is that you get a device that you can take at home and do the stimulation at home, just like you could do with a hearing aid or by tongue stimulation and combine auditory stimulation, because then you can use it whenever you need it. So you start with an initial treatment, let's say of 2 to 3 months, then you taper it down, and when the tinnitus might worsen, which could be the result of some whatever stressful situation that happens to you, or when you get a flu or another disease, or when you're extremely tired for whatever reason. And we often see that the tinnitus goes up, then you can do what we call a boost session, where you do a couple of extra sessions. But of course, if you can do that at home, it's a lot better. So our neuromodulation clinic will in the future be hopefully more home-centered, where people have a device at home. That it's not yet like that, but it's coming, where somebody prescribes it, and then you go to a pharmacy or a shop, you get a device that is programmed distantly from the treatment center. And this is what we're currently studying, and that's certainly where the future will be.
Excellent, excellent. And another question for you, Dr. Derrida, how important is encouraging neuroplasticity with respect to retraining your brain to ignore tinnitus? And in your opinion, what modalities best support neuroplasticity for tinnitus?
Yes, no, that's a very good question. So neuroplasticity, for those who don't know it, basically means that the brain can adapt to changes in the environment. Just it can adapt functionally and structurally. Now, anything you do involves plasticity, because otherwise our brain would be a hardwired computer, which it isn't. It's constantly adjusting to the environment. Now, that being said, adapting to the environment can be done by changing the peripheral input, which is what you do with hearing aids or with sound therapy. That induces neuroplasticity. But of course, you can try to increase neuroplasticity, and one of the hypes in neuroscience are psychedelics, as you might have heard while I was talking, because it is believed and shown in animals, but we don't know in humans, that psychedelics can open what is called a critical period, which is a period of extreme plasticity that occurs during childhood, when a child learns basically everything. And it is hoped that if we can open this extreme plasticity for a short time and then apply auditory stimulation, or then apply via hearing aids or noise stimulation, or then apply neuromodulation, that increased plasticity can be used more readily, and therefore also give better and faster results.
Excellent. We have time for just one or two more quick questions. A common concern in the tinnitus community is sleep. So from your perspective, understanding the brain very well, how do you counsel your patients in your clinic about sleep and the benefits of sleep for someone who has tinnitus?
This is extremely important, because the brain normally consumes about 25% of our energy. So does the immune system, so does the heart and lungs, and so does the abdominal, so our intestines and liver, etc. Now, throughout evolution, our body has learned to use this energy that's available as efficiently as possible. So during the day, of course, we consume a lot of brain energy and less energy related to the immune system. However, during the night, the immune system is active and our brain is less active. The problem occurs when you go from acute tinnitus to chronic tinnitus. One of the main hypotheses now is that that's a low-grade chronic neuroinflammation. So you have to get rid of that neuroinflammation, otherwise the tinnitus will not be resolved. Which means if you don't sleep at night, when your immune system is optionally functioning, you're just worsening the problem, because the inflammation will just get worse and worse, because your immune system can't do what it does. What it has to do, try to suppress that low-grade neuroinflammation. Therefore, sleeping is extremely important. So what we tend to do is, one of the side effects of clonazepam, which is a controversial drug, which I know that in some countries people don't like it, and that is related to the idea that it can be used, that it can be addictive, to which I can talk later if somebody wants. But so with the clonazepam, you can that as a side effect causes that people sleep better. And if that in itself does not work, then we also see that once you start with certain forms of neurofeedback or neurostimulation, people also sleep better. And if need be, we will still add even more drugs, because you have to make people sleep better. Otherwise, you can try whatever you want to reduce the sound. It won't benefit, because your brain just keeps on being more and more inflamed and get worse and worse.
Dr. De Ridder, thank you so much for your amazing presentation. If you have a few minutes, you're invited to please hang out here in the Q&A section on Zoom. You can personally answer any questions you feel called for. We're so grateful you've shared your expertise. Up next, we have Dr. Hazel Goedhart, who is going to present representing Tinnitus Hub, Tinnitus Talk, and representing the Tinnitus Research and Treatment Update as well. So let's everyone just give a thanks to Dr. De Ridder for an amazing presentation. And next, we're going to have a quick update and then transition into Hazel's presentation. So Hazel, welcome. How are you doing today?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I'm very well.
Excellent.
I enjoyed I think the second half of Dirk De Ridder's presentation, and I have to say I really agree with one of his conclusions, being that the solution ultimately will come from a combination of different treatments, right? New and existing treatments, and also personalized treatment, and finding what works for each individual. So I think that's a very important conclusion.
Absolutely. Let me give a quick update. This is our schedule for the 300 of us that are here live. We're now starting the 12:30 p.m. Eastern session, Tinnitus Research and Treatments with Hazel Goedhart from Tinnitus Hub. After that, we will have Dr. Tracy Peck Holcomb on the 4 pillars of tinnitus treatment, followed by a break, and then Dr. Powell Jastroboff and myself closing out the day. We hope you can make it for as much of today as possible, and we will have some recordings that we will share in the next week or so. So Hazel, you're welcome to now share any visual presentations you have. And in that time, I will give an update that You guys ask amazing questions, and there's hundreds of you here. So just remember that our community, the tinnitus community, number one, it's very strong. Number two, it's global. We're featuring Europe, United States, New Zealand. This is excellent. And I'm really excited to introduce Hazel, who is a strong pillar in the tinnitus community, especially in Europe. Tinnitus Talk is a online forum which has a lot of community around it, and it answers a lot of questions peer-to-peer in the tinnitus world. Tinnitus Hub is a nonprofit center based out of Europe that does a lot of good for our community as well. And Hazel is one of the co-founders and organizers of both of those. So with that, I welcome Hazel, and we'll continue with the presentation with an opportunity for Q&A as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ben, for the kind introduction.
And if you can press the present to go full screen, then you'll be all set.
I thought I had already. So let's see, what else do I need to press? Can you see my presentation at all?
We press slideshow at the very top, the top
right.
tab. Slideshow. Yep, it's top middle left next to animation, slideshow review.
Oh yeah, it's hidden behind this.
And then play from start.
Got it. There we go.
Perfect. You're all set.
Thank you, Ben, for the technical help. Just to clarify, I think you initially introduced me as doctor. I am not a medical doctor, just to be very clear about that. I'm just a person suffering from tinnitus herself since about 5 years now, who became a member of this online community called Tinnitus Talk, which was founded by Marco, whom I run the organization with now. And together we do a lot of things to sort of organize the tinnitus community online and educate people and all of that. But I am not a medical doctor, so please don't take medical advice from me. All right. So, let me go back actually to my first slide, because first of all, I just wanted to say that I don't have a very good sense of who the audience are here. So I wish I could hear more from you guys, why you're here, what you're hoping to learn. So I'm not sure if what I'm going to tell you is going to be helpful or not. If I miss the mark, sorry, I'm doing my best. Also, I kind of struggled with, I guess, the general theme of this event. If I read the event description, it said you'll be given tips and tricks on how to manage your tinnitus. That's not per se exactly what we do, but I don't want to be a party pooper, so I'm definitely going to give that my best shot as well. So we're Tinnitus Hub. We're a global patient organization. I think Ben mentioned based in Europe, but that's not really relevant because we operate globally and online. When we talk about tinnitus treatments, we're not really happy with the existing treatment options available and the standard of care. We think tinnitus patients and sufferers deserve a lot better. Ultimately, what we want, obviously, is a cure for tinnitus, but also we really want tinnitus sufferers to be taken seriously. I think the impact that tinnitus can have on people's lives is vastly underestimated. And what we do in terms of, achieving those goals, our main thing is we connect tinnitus sufferers, right? So we run the largest online tinnitus community, Tinnitus Talk. That's how we started, I think, 11 or 12 years ago. As an online peer-to-peer forum where people can, advise each other and hear about each other's experience and generally feel less alone. Over time, we started also providing research and treatment information. Our main channel for this is the Tinnitus Talk podcast, which I'm pretty sure is the biggest podcast on tinnitus with 21 episodes now. We've also, over time, built up, I would say, a strong network in the research community. And we really try to encourage researchers to involve tinnitus sufferers more directly in their research. And finally, we try to raise awareness on tinnitus. But to be honest, raising awareness takes a lot of skill and a lot of resources that we really don't have because we're a very small nonprofit. And so we tend to just support existing campaigns from other organizations. So yeah, we are a small nonprofit, global and online. We run this online Tinnitus Talk community. We're completely impartial and non-commercial. There's no ads on the platform. We're the only tinnitus organization run by volunteers who all have tinnitus themselves. So I'm also, this is not my day job. I'm doing this next to my day job. And I think the advantage of the way we're set up is that it's a very grassroots organization. So it's the community itself that determines the strategy. All right, so since the request was for tips and tricks on managing your tinnitus, I'm sure a lot of these things have come up in various presentations, but this is really what it boils down to from our years of experience in interacting with people struggling with tinnitus. Obviously, you want to get medically checked out. It's very difficult often to find doctors who will do the proper investigation, but it is important that you check if there is a physical issue with the ear or the neck or the jaw and rule those things out and get them fixed. Find support from peers, from people who understand, because it's often very difficult to find that support among family and friends who may not always understand. That's why the Tinnitus Talk community exists. Get support from experts if you feel like some kind of counseling or something could help you and you have access to that, by all means, go for it. But also learn, if you're interested in tinnitus treatments, try to educate yourself about the status of research and treatments, because there's a lot of traps you can otherwise fall into, which I will cover in some of the next slides. You have to try things and kind of find out what works for you. I'm sure it's been mentioned in other presentations, tinnitus is very heterogeneous. People have different causes. Tinnitus manifests differently. It affects people differently. So you have to find out what works for you. As we all know, there's no really effective treatments for tinnitus currently, but we do hear a lot of anecdotal stories of people who say, well, I changed my diet in such and such way, or I made this other lifestyle change and, my tinnitus was significantly reduced. So it's worth just, trying things out and finding what works for you. And finally, I would encourage people, if you feel strongly about the need for better treatments and research, get involved, through Tinnitus Hub or other channels and try to make a difference. It certainly helped for me. All right, a few more tips on if you're looking into treatments for tinnitus, especially if you're looking beyond sort of, just kind of the lifestyle changes and counseling types of things, but looking more into devices, supplements, experimental treatments and things, you have to be a skeptic, a healthy skeptic. The information out there is overwhelming. Don't make the mistake of Googling tinnitus cure, because, you'll get a whole page of 90% or more nonsense or scam results. There are unfortunately a lot of people out there who will try to take advantage of desperate tinnitus sufferers. Don't part with your money too easily. Beware that not all products out there are tested. Just because you can buy it legally and it's available doesn't mean it's tested for tinnitus, doesn't even mean it's tested for basic safety. That really depends on a lot of regulations in different countries. So it's complicated, but just be careful. And don't assume because you hear one person saying, well, this worked for me, that it will also work for you or for other people. I think a good overview of existing treatments can be found on the Tinnitus Talk website under the treatments section. So I think the list is up to about 100 here. We tried to keep this fairly organized so that it's sort of easy to use. This screenshot here obviously shows only the first 10 or so results. I think these are the most viewed and most discussed topics on there. So some of these threads, these are all, so each treatment has its own discussion thread, and the most viewed threads have over 1 million views. So it gives you a pretty good overview, but it's also important to note there's a disclaimer at the top saying, this may not be proven for use in patients with tinnitus. So you can use this to educate yourself, to discuss with other people. There's a lot of knowledgeable Tinnitus Talk members who can help you figure this stuff out. But yeah, there's definitely also like experimental stuff on here, like stem cell treatment, which certainly, you know, I wouldn't recommend that you try because, you know, it could be dangerous and is also very expensive. Now, this slide is probably the most technical one, but I feel very strongly about this, that, you know, if you're a tinnitus sufferer and you're interested to learn about treatment options and you're keeping an eye on the research and what new treatments might be coming on the market, you have to become a bit of a critic. You know, you have to be able to, you know, look at a tinnitus study beyond just what is claimed in the, let's say, in the marketing lingo, and evaluate the quality of the study itself. It's not so easy. It's not so straightforward for a layperson. I'm a layperson. I had to educate myself on some of these things. And I do see people often falling into this trap of, you know, well, this was published in a peer-reviewed academic journal, so it must be legitimate. Well, you know, not necessarily. Like, the quality of studies out there just varies greatly. So at the right, you see the that pyramid-shaped thing, which represents the hierarchy of evidence. It's kind of a simplified version of it, but just to give you an idea, like, there are different levels of evidence when it comes to proving that something works. Generally, it's, again, a bit of a simplification, but I would say if it hasn't been evaluated in a randomized controlled trial, an RCT, it's probably not a very good study. There might be exceptions, but even if there is an RCT, you know, be critical on things like how the study was designed. You know, is the sample size sufficient? How were the patients selected? Like, I've seen studies where they seem to have selected or included people who had only just gotten tinnitus. And we know that in the first year, there tends to be a lot of natural improvement. So if you include those people, it's very easy to claim that the success of your treatment, you know, that the improvements made were due to the treatment, whereas in fact, it was just natural improvement. So there's all these kind of biases that can creep into a study design. Placebo is another thing. Of course, you want some kind of control. You want a treatment group and a control group. People tend to assume that placebo is the best control, but in some situations, it's actually better to compare against comparable treatments, right? So if you're assessing the effectiveness of a sound therapy, you kind of want to compare against another existing sound therapy that has been studied before. So that's a fair comparison, as because you want to see if it's better than what already exists on the market, right? Then the other big thing to look at is outcome measures. So what metrics are they using to assess the success of the treatment? And it's really important to realize that there are no objective outcome measures for tinnitus, unfortunately, right? There's not a blood test or a scan that you can take to see you have tinnitus and its severity is X. So how it works is people fill in surveys before and after treatment. So there's the Tinnitus Functional Index, the Tinnitus Handicap Inventory, and a few other recognized measurement tools. But obviously it's subjective, right? So it's not the measure that we would like. That's why research into developing objective measures is very important for getting to any kind of effective treatment. Then if we look at these outcome measures that are used, like the Tinnitus Functional Index, I've gotten very wary over time with how success is defined. So for the Tinnitus Functional Index, for instance, if you reduce by 13 points, so it's a 100-point scale. If you reduce, let's say, from 63 to 50, that's considered clinically significant. But if you actually look at how that 13 points was determined to be the clinically significant outcome, what it actually correlates with is people feeling slightly better, right? So slightly better is still, it's still a positive outcome, but a lot of people don't realize that that is what it is. So when new studies, new devices or so come to market and they're marketed as, X% of people see clinically significant improvement, just be aware that that is what it means. It means X% of people felt slightly better. And it's not even said that that's due to treatment per se. It could be also placebo effect. So I think we really need to look critically actually at those outcome measures and be a bit more, honest in how those results are represented, because I feel it's often a bit misleading. Now, at the top of the pyramid, the hierarchy of evidence, we have systematic reviews. And that's where a group of researchers look at all the studies that were conducted for one treatment, evaluate the quality of those studies and the effectiveness of the treatment. And you can check this out for yourself. You can go to the Cochrane Library, which is one of the key forms of systematic reviews. And they have systematic reviews for a number of tinnitus treatments, and I've listed them there in the speech bubble, sound therapy, hearing aids, et cetera, et cetera. And none of them have found conclusive evidence that it works, meaning that for most of the studies evaluated, the quality of the study itself, the way it was designed, just wasn't sufficient to draw a conclusion one way or the other, right? And even for CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, which is considered to have like the best designed, like the highest quality studies, the conclusion of the systematic review was, compared to no intervention, there was low certainty evidence that CBT may reduce the negative impact of tinnitus. So I would encourage you all to be very critical when looking at new treatments, because, and this may all sound very depressing, but I think I want to end on a hopeful note, because the reason I'm encouraging tinnitus patients to become critics and to educate themselves on how research is conducted is because by doing that, we can make it better. We can improve the quality of research. We can get involved with the research and encourage researchers to improve their outcome measures, for instance. And so this is really, what we as Tinnitus Hub are advocating for, and we want as many people to come on board as possible. Help us advocate for more research, more meaningful research. I mean, research that really speaks to what we tinnitus patients want. So, for instance, a lot of patients don't want to see more studies on psychological interventions, but on interventions that reduce the tinnitus itself. So that's something we can advocate for. So, and I think by involving patients directly in the research and educating ourselves and letting our voices be heard, together we can improve things. So on that more positive note, I look forward to hopefully seeing you all on Tinnitus Talk, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Hazel. We had the chat going and there was some very positive feedback about your presentation. I think that today's presentations so far have explained that this community we have in the tinnitus world, it's a combination of doing what we can now to get better now and investing in science and research to have more significantly effective treatments in the future, hopefully sooner rather than later, because there's many people that need it. So the community work that you've been doing, the Tinnitus Talk information can help calm the anxiety or the fear around tinnitus. So I think high quality information is very much the mission that we're both on together.
Yep.
We did have one question, which was from an individual who asked, inside of the Tinnitus Talk forum, do you have any tips or recommendations for how to avoid being triggered by someone else's negative story or perhaps their negative comment?
Yeah. Well, this is one of the reasons that we really invest a lot of time and effort. And again, it's all volunteer time. So, it's not perfect, but we invest a lot of time and effort in moderating the forum. And that means we remove like content that is harmful, like bullying others or encouraging others to do bad things or so. So that content is removed. Also, we keep things very organized, or at least we try to, right? And because it's organized, you're in control of what you want to see or not. So if you just want to see positive success stories, we have a whole section marked success stories. So that's what I did when I first got tinnitus. I just went to that section and I read the stories. There's like over 1,000 of them, and some of them are people that actually, managed to, their tinnitus stopped or it reduced. Others, people are habituated. Like everyone has their own story, and it just really helped me to feel more positive about my future. So in the end, you're in control of how you use any online resources. What we can do as moderators is keep it organized so that you can go to the content that's helpful for you.
Absolutely. And if you're an individual who knows, hey, someone else's negative story or their dark comment might trigger me, then just tread lightly and try to avoid going down those paths, and just be cautious there. As with anything on the internet, not just Tinnitus Talk, of course.
Sure.
We have a comment from Stephen Lee, who comments and says that being an educated consumer requires to be conversant about research, design, and studies, which you have presented so well today. We do have a question for you, which is from Khalil. Khalil asks, Hazel, how do we get doctors like general physicians to direct patients to better tinnitus resources?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's such a good question. And we just hear the stories time and time and time again. And I'm sure it's come up in various presentations here. People go to the doctor and a lot of doctors barely even know anything about tinnitus, which always astounds me because there's so many people struggling with tinnitus, right? So I would say you have to advocate for yourself as a patient, right? You go to the doctor and you feel like they don't really understand tinnitus. Go to a different doctor. And of course, it's easy to say, like some people might not be in a position to, or live in a country where they don't have good access to healthcare and all of those things. But if you have the possibility, find a doctor that takes you seriously. If they don't take you seriously, then, everything else is kind of pointless. They're not going to refer you to specialists, which they should. And it's literally written in the clinical guidelines of many countries. There's the European clinical guidelines for tinnitus, the US ones. It's literally stated there that should always be a step. Always refer the patient to an audiologist for basic audiology check. A lot of doctors don't do it. So if you as a patient are not aware that that's actually literally written in the clinical guidelines, right, then you can't advocate for yourself. So knowledge is power.
Thank you. We have our next question from Paul. Paul asks, Hazel, Shark Tank funded CBD gummies for tinnitus. Anything you can say about this? Do you have any comments on that?
I wish I'd seen that episode, actually.
I haven't watched it either. I've seen comments about it, but I haven't watched the raw episode.
Yeah. I wonder why. Okay. Yeah. I'm immediately skeptical. You've seen my presentation. I'm generally skeptical of any claims. I doubt there has been an RCT to test, what was it? CBD gummies, right? So
in my understanding, there has not been. And if I learn later that is any different, I'll go back and leave a comment here. But in my understanding, that hasn't been, and I think it showcases us how shows to us that media can be very powerful, and if CBD gummies for tinnitus, which is not a proven treatment, although it may have helped some individuals, and we acknowledge that, it's not a proven treatment, and it's dangerous when it's shared so openly on a major platform that people think, oh, well, if it passed their filters, then it must work. But your presentation here tonight would suggest, well, maybe they are too liberal with the kind of medical related things they let on their show.
Yeah, I think those kind of TV programs, they, especially when it comes to health care treatments, they should be a bit more discriminating, right? And they should ask the tough questions. And I haven't seen the episode, but it doesn't really sound like they did in this situation. And to be clear, like you said, it certainly could be that some people could benefit from this, right? Just because something hasn't been tested and proven to work doesn't mean that there aren't one or two or a few individuals out there whom it might help for. Again, tinnitus is so heterogeneous that almost anything will work for at least someone, right? But that doesn't mean it's going to work for most people.
All right, guys, there's 300 of us live, which is amazing. We have a global community here, which is exactly why we wanted to make this event, the Relief Summit. Last question for you, Hazel, and then we'll transfer over to our next presenter, Dr. Tracy. The question here is from Jim. Hazel, what do we have to do to get more funding from government entities, whether in the United States or in Europe? Jim says that this is such a huge problem for a large segment of our population, including military veterans. Any ideas on funding?
Yeah, it's a big problem. It's one of the major impediments holding back tinnitus research. If you look at the levels of funding out there for almost any other area of healthcare that, let's say, has a similar socioeconomic impact, those levels of funding for those other conditions tend to be much higher, like even like 100 times higher, right? So it is extremely limited what's available for tinnitus, and it's surprising in a way that, like you said, this is an important, it's the predominant health issue among veterans in the US. We know that, yet the Department of Defense, I mean, it's investing something in tinnitus, but by no means the level it should be if you look at the size of the problem, right? So that's where indeed we do have to advocate. So, well, what we try to do is keep our eyes open for windows of opportunity. It's very, you can just randomly start advocating and put things online. It's not going to influence policymakers, but sometimes there's a window of opportunity. I think a few years ago, the NIDCD, which is the department, US government department that provides a lot of funding for hearing research, they were asking patients to give input to their strategic plan. And so we rallied people in the tinnitus doc community to go to the online forum and, advocate for more funding for tinnitus treatment. So it's those kind of windows of opportunity that you have to spot. And then, the fact that we have a large online reach and can rally a lot of people could make a difference, but you have to be very persistent. And it's like, it's like trying to steer an oil tanker in a different direction. It just takes years, unfortunately.
Hazel, we're so glad that you're part of this conversation, and your presentation was very insightful to all of us. So we wish you well and hope to talk to you soon. And thank you again for being here on the summit.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Up next, we have Dr. Tracy Peck Holcomb representing Treble Health. And today's presentation by Dr. Tracy will cover the 4 pillars of tinnitus treatment: sound, stress, sleep, and somatosensory. So one thing I would like to start with here is that I first met Tracy when she was leading the San Francisco Tinnitus Support Group, and I was early in my career of wanting to become a tinnitus specialist. Fast forward a few years later, we're both working together on Treble Health, and we provide telehealth and work with patients. Dr. Tracy Peck Holcomb is an audiologist, tinnitus specialist, hyperacusis expert, and is the former president of the California Academy of Audiology. So Dr. Tracy, I'm going to pass it to you. We're so excited. And for those of you who are here live, you can comment in the chat with any questions you have, as well as ask in the Q&A. And we have a few audiologists from Treble who will be able to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ben. Hi, everybody out in virtual world. Thanks for having me today. So I think my talk kind of flows nicely from sort of Dr. Ritter giving sort of the underlying causes and pathophysiology related to tinnitus, and then Hazel's talk that she just did about being sort of a advocate for yourself and the collective power of consumers to sort of drive changes relative to tinnitus research and trying to, eventually come up with these objective measures and outcome measures and potential new treatments for it. So my talk is going to, one second. Sort of go through quickly for just a quick review of who Treble Health is. If you haven't heard of us or you're new, this is your first sort of touch point with us, just giving you a brief background into who we are and what we do and why we do it, and sort of a typical patient journey in person and how that differs from the telehealth model that Dr. Ben founded. The main point of my presentation is to go over kind of the 4 pillars of tinnitus treatment, how we framework our program and working with patients to be able to really drive that habituation process, So our treatment approach, our comprehensive and holistic approach to working with tinnitus patients and those with sound sensitivity. And then I just wanted to highlight one case study of a patient that I actually worked with and how we implement those 4 pillars to really break out and target the treatment plan. So Treble Health, if you've been participating today or yesterday or seen the YouTube, we are a telehealth specialty clinic for individuals with tinnitus and sound sensitivity, founded by Dr. Ben in 2020. And I think he and all of us on our team, we realized, I've worked with tinnitus patients for almost 16 years. We realized that there is a significant need. There's 25 million Americans alone reporting bothersome tinnitus, many millions more internationally. And realizing, over the course of many years that there are significant barriers to just access to providers who understand what tinnitus is, understand what a patient goes through, and to be able to provide help in the various areas and coexisting things that come up related to someone with tinnitus. And so, our mission is to provide and empower all individuals with tinnitus and sound sensitivity with the knowledge, skills, techniques, resources, and support that they need to live full and productive lives. And so our combination of technology, audiology, and counseling is addressing and providing solutions for significant clinical population that has been historically and chronically underserved for many years. So I don't need to belabor this. I'm sure many of you have experienced this and could talk much more in detail about this experience. But someone who has an initial or acute onset of tinnitus or hypersensitivity to sound, the first thing we typically do is consult Dr. Google, as Hazel mentioned, and sometimes that will be followed up with an appointment with urgent care or primary care, or even going to the ER, depending on how significant that initial onset and the experience of that is. A lot of times, variables such as long wait times to get in to see providers and long distances, long travel to be able to get into anybody who even knows what tinnitus is may delay that sort of initial follow-up. And then, of course, the time and time again told that there's nothing you can do about it, that you just have to learn to live with it. In ENT follow-up, typically, a lot of times you're told the same thing. Hopefully, after participating in yesterday and today, all of you know that there actually are a lot of things that you can do currently to help with managing your tinnitus and sound sensitivity. And with an ENT, sometimes you'll have a hearing evaluation completed, you'll get an audiogram done and fit with hearing aids. And sometimes as an add-on, they'll throw in a sound therapy option and tell you to listen to your sound therapy sound. Occasionally, it'll be follow-up or referral to psychiatry, psychologist. Again, most are unfamiliar with tinnitus and hypersensitivity. It's not their area of specialty. So most people feel like they're kind of running around in circles, right? You're spending a lot of money, you're not getting answers, which only causes more stress and anxiety and further exacerbates the tinnitus or the hypersensitivity to sound. And the coexisting issues that we know go along with it, such as anxiety, sleep, concentration, focus, all of these things wrapped up in the tinnitus or along with the tinnitus itself. So the entry point to actually working with an audiologist who potentially specializes in this area can take several weeks to months, depending on, geographic location. There just aren't enough of us in the field of audiology who specialize in this area to really cover the significant need, which is why Ben founded the company to begin with, to be able to improve access. So via Treble Health, how is it a little bit different? Same initial, I think, consultation with Dr. Google for a patient who, their tinnitus onset happens. Nowadays, if you search tinnitus, likely Treble Health, an ad or a YouTube video link will pop up. And from there, patients can schedule an initial telehealth consult with any of our providers on our team, complimentary for either the same day. Oftentimes we can get people in the same day or the next day. With audiologists, everybody on our team, that is our sole focus. It's working with patients who have tinnitus and or sound sensitivity as their primary issues. We will obtain a comprehensive case history, talk about medical follow-up so far, kind of outline the different options of our program, recommendations, which I'll get into in a little bit around the 4 pillars, make the appropriate referrals to ENT if there are any medical contraindications to starting work with us. So what we're actually seeing now is that many of the patients who come through for our free complimentary calls, we are the first touch point. So they haven't even gone yet to see ENT or primary care. So certainly that's part of the assessment. And it's important to get that evaluated, make sure there's not an underlying medical cause before moving forward with treatment with us. So patients can then sign up to receive care and services with us. And the entry point for actually starting a treatment plan can begin within sort of a 1 week time frame. So significant shorter time from onset to intervention, which makes a difference. So we create a personalized and customized program, benchmarking patients' progress throughout the process of habituation. Everybody's tinnitus, there's general sort of themes that you see when you work with patients for many, many years, but everybody's tinnitus and how it affects them is unique. It's like our fingerprint, right? We all have them, but there's nuances there. And that's sort of the basis for the 4 pillars, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. The telehealth platform in general has really improved and increased access to high quality care. And as I mentioned just a bit ago, earlier intervention, which we do believe results in improved treatment outcomes for the patients that we work with. They don't have to wait excessive, wait times in order to get in to see a provider who specializes in this area, travel long distances, get shuffled around from doctor to doctor. These have all been sort of consistent barriers to care for the tinnitus population for forever. And a lot of that is removed via our clinical care and service model. So online, lots of information and lots of misinformation, right? And how do you know which is which? And how do you know how to navigate all of the overwhelming amount of information that's online when you type in tinnitus or you type in sound sensitivity? So there's many different treatment options, which is a positive, but it can become very overwhelming very quickly, especially if you're in that acute phase where tinnitus has just started and you're feeling overwhelmed by all of it. So just listing a few here: tinnitus retraining therapy. Dr. Jastoboff, I know, is going to be talking later, which is fantastic. Progressive tinnitus management was developed by the VA, over-the-counter supplements, acupuncture, cognitive behavioral therapy, which has been mentioned several times as well, prescription medications, and then a whole host of a bunch of other things. That could be an entire 20-page slide on all the different things that you'll find online. So what actually works right now? We created our treatment program. I think it's important to have a framework. And even in my previous clinic before I joined Treble Health, it is helpful for both, I think, the provider and the patient. So it provides sort of a comprehensive and insightful framework for patients with tinnitus or sound sensitivity to identify which areas should be a focus of the treatment plan or the therapy plan. And which areas, we don't need to sort of prioritize or make a primary focus at the start of treatment. So I think this framework helps to make the treatment implementation more streamlined. It helps to make it more strategic in navigating and driving that steady progress towards habituation, which is the ultimate goal, getting patients back to their lives. So by breaking it down into these smaller areas, it becomes less overwhelming for the patient themselves. It feels like more manageable. You can break it down into these smaller steps, build upon that foundation, layer these skills and these tools on based on the different areas of focus. So the 4 pillars: sound is obviously one of them, sleep, stress reduction, and then somatosensory. So the first one, and the one that's going to be the most obvious, is sound. But when I say sound as a primary pillar for tinnitus treatment, we're talking about more than just the tinnitus itself. So obviously the tinnitus, when I work with a patient, the specific characteristics, like I said, it's like our fingerprint, the tinnitus, the pitch, the loudness, the quality, the characteristics. Are there multiple sounds? Does it change in locality of where people are hearing it or feeling it even sometimes, right? So getting the details on that helps to sort of give us insight, because we can't hear what you hear. So the more detail we have on that, I think that helps in creating sort of that customized sound therapy program. And sound therapy itself is very different from this term is thrown around a lot, and sound therapy is not just throwing sound on in the background and good luck, right? A sound therapy program has a protocol, it has guidelines, it has parameters, it has, what specific customized sound or combination of sounds might work for someone. Some people love white noise, some people do not love white noise. So how do you create and customize the particular type of sound that a patient is going to find relaxing and soothing and actually helps with giving them some relief from their tinnitus? How many hours a day? What do you do when you're turning your sound therapy off? What additional type of sound therapy can you have in terms of acoustic enrichment or sound enrichment to help supplement the customized sound therapy? There's a lot that goes into it. And I think that that's often misrepresented a little bit in terms of when you read about, what sound therapy actually is. Then in addition to the tinnitus sound therapy itself, we're also talking about sound sensitivity. So you'll see the terms sort of decreased sound tolerance, you'll see hyperacusis, you'll see misophonia, which has to do with the dislike or sensitivity to more specific sounds. Research shows that 30 to 50% of individuals who report bothersome tinnitus also report sound sensitivity issues. Now, if a patient reports that hypersensitivity or hyperacusis is the primary issue, the sound therapy protocol and program is very different than someone whose primary issue is tinnitus. And typically we want to address the sound sensitivity first because we want to really sort of strengthen the auditory system's ability to tolerate normal levels of sound in order to then focus on the tinnitus retraining piece of it. So a very important information to kind of gather in those initial couple of sessions with a patient to be able to, again, sort of frame out what areas you're going to focus on and in which order you're going to do it. There's a strategy behind it. Additionally, we're talking about fear of sound, which is also known as or referred to as phonophobia. So a lot of people that we work with, there's this underlying sort of concern or worry about, as you're getting better, like going back into the world, right? What's safe? What's a safe level of sound? What's potentially damaging? I don't want to do anything that's going to make my tinnitus or sound sensitivity worse. How do I know if I should be wearing my earplugs? How do I know if I'm overusing my earplugs? All of those questions create a feeling of uncertainty and increase anxiety. And so breaking that down, giving, sort of the answers, giving the education, empowering patients to feel like they have the knowledge base and the understanding and the tools to feel like they have a sense of control regarding kind of sound exposure, noise exposure, being in different acoustic environments. It's all part of that first pillar of sound. The second pillar is sleep, which we know is a huge contributing factor to the exacerbation of tinnitus and sound sensitivity. Research shows about 54% of patients with tinnitus also report sleep issues or insomnia. Not all, but a majority, or more than half of the population of tinnitus patients report some sleep issues. Now, some people had a history of sleep issues or insomnia prior to the onset of tinnitus, and some patients will say that those sleep issues didn't start until after or post tinnitus onset. Regardless, you have to address that first. Sleep, I think Dr. Ritter talked about it. I think a couple of presenters talked about it yesterday. It is essential and fundamental to be able to function as a human being, and certainly to be able to navigate and manage tinnitus and to be able to use these techniques that we talk about with patients in a way that's going to be beneficial. If you're not getting sleep, everything else is more challenging to deal with. We know that lack of sleep is tied with increase in anxiety. It makes you more irritable and more frustrated. So if sleep is reported, as we're framing out working with a patient, it's a primary focus area for us to work on. So we're talking about sleep hygiene and reviewing their sleep routine. What things are they doing leading up to bed? What are they doing if they wake up in the middle of the night? What are we doing in the morning time when they first wake up relative to their sleep, relative to their tinnitus? So going over tools and techniques to improve sleep. We're talking about sound therapy options for sleep. You'll see the sleep headband. I don't know if anybody's using something like that or a sound pillow. There's lots of different options for sound therapy for nighttime, sleep apps that sort of do guided meditation or sleep stories to help with kind of calming that nervous system down prior to going to sleep to help facilitate falling asleep and staying asleep. we're talking about evaluating and ruling out underlying medical issues that might be related to those sleep issues. So if there's sleep apnea or some other physiological underlying cause that may be a factor in poor sleep, we want to make sure that that's addressed too, because that is contributing to not getting enough sleep to help with that tinnitus management. And then for those who really have severe sleep issues, sort of what would be really diagnosed as insomnia, there is a program, CBTI, so cognitive behavioral therapy, specifically designed for insomnia. There are web-based programs, there are self-guided programs, and then certainly you can work in person or via telehealth with someone who specializes in this area. And we will make referrals for that if that seems to be, sleep is a significant issue that's affecting the patient's overall comprehensive plan. The third, and I think, again, significant contributing factor to being able to manage through the stages of tinnitus habituation, the third pillar is stress reduction. So I talk a lot with my patients in the beginning about the concept of the window of tolerance. I'm not sure, some of you have probably heard this or are familiar with this if you have a background in psychology, but the idea is that, you know, we all kind of function in this general window. We all have this optimal window where we feel self-regulated, we feel grounded, we feel calm, our nervous system is feeling at peace. And there is fluctuations within that window of tolerance, not that there's not sort of these stressors, but we're able to kind of get ourselves, you know, grounded again to stay within that optimal window. Now, when there's significant stress or a significant traumatic event, our nervous system is thrown completely out of whack, right? It goes haywire. And we go way out of that window of tolerance. We either go to a state of hyperarousal, which is that fight or flight phase, which is characterized by anxiety, panic attacks, sort of feeling overwhelmed. You know, our nervous system is hyperactive, right? Or we go into hypoarousal, which is the freeze response, where we feel kind of shut down, we feel depressed, we feel exhausted. And this, you know, one of these two states, either hyperarousal or hypoarousal, are really common in the acute onset phase with tinnitus or sound sensitivity. Our system is thrown out of whack, it's totally overwhelmed. So a lot of the things that we work with patients on, particularly related to this pillar, is how do we get ourselves back into that optimal window? And if we can get ourselves back into this optimal window, we know that that will help with supplementing tinnitus habituation. Another big part of stress reduction is to address how our thoughts and our feelings affect our behaviors and actions related to the tinnitus. So CBT, by now you guys are all experts in CBT. By definition, it's a type of treatment that helps people learn how to identify and change the destructive or disturbing thought patterns that have a negative influence on our behavior and our emotions. The goal of CBT is to be able to learn how to identify those automatic negative thoughts. I mean, they pop into our head before we even realize we're having them, right? It's something that's automatic. And then through practice, which it takes a lot of practice and work, to be able to build like skill and capacity around being able to identify those thoughts, you know, sort of challenge those thoughts, and to be able to replace them or reframe them. You'll hear the term or see the term cognitive restructuring a lot related to CBT, to be able to change to more objective, realistic, neutral thoughts related to the tinnitus. So if we can break this cycle that happens related to the tinnitus, then we also know that our overall stress level is going to go down. That helps us get us back into that optimal window of tolerance. And then this negative cycle, you know, this negative feedback loop that we talk about a lot with our patients, you know, you hear the tinnitus, there's this fear response that happens, the feeling or the thoughts or emotions, you know, feeling anxious or worried or angry, frustrated, manifests in mental or emotional and physiological stress reactions, which make us only more aware of the tinnitus and more bothered. And then that cycle goes round and round and round. So in addition to CBT, it's also really important to, under this pillar, to talk about and come up with the different stress management or stress reduction techniques that are going to work for each individual person. So I've listed a few, progressive muscle relaxation, guided breathing, going for a walk outdoors, spending quality time with friends and family. And this is really individual to each person. Spending quality time with friends and family might be the best thing for one person, and for another person that might cause a significant amount of stress. So it's really about actually identifying, which 5 things, which 5 stress management reduction techniques actually are going to work for you. We recommend, having it written out, having a visible list, like post it on your fridge, post it on your bathroom mirror, have it readily available and visible. So when you're starting to feel stressed and overwhelmed, instead of going into that freeze or fight or flight mode, it's like, all right, I have these 5 things. I'm going to pick one of these things and do them now. And it's about not only that, but becoming aware through training and education and working one-on-one with our providers or with any specialist in this area on kind of being strategic and proactive about becoming aware of this build of stress and anxiety prior to you getting to that overwhelm point. So instead of being reactive with these things, when your system's already out of whack, you're already feeling completely overwhelmed by everything, to be able to sort of start to identify the signs when that stress is starting to build up and be super proactive about implementing those strategies consistently on a daily basis as part of your comprehensive treatment plan. We know that if we can sort of dial it back and identify, okay, I'm starting to feel, my breath rate's feeling shallow, my thoughts are starting to spin, all of these things, there's signs, right? And it's about becoming aware of those things and implementing the techniques that are going to work to bring that nervous system back down to feeling regulated prior to things getting out of control. And then the 4th pillar is somatosensory. So this is the one that, I'm sure doctors, if you go to see a primary care or ENT for the most part, and you mentioned, tinnitus, I doubt that this is even brought up as a question. But somatosensory or somatic component to your tinnitus is a subtype of tinnitus that is associated with activation of the somatosensory, somatomotor, and visual motor systems. So a key characteristic of this subtype of tinnitus is that it's modulated. You can modulate it by physical contact or movement. And apologies, this graphic is a little bit fuzzy, but you'll see the percentage of tinnitus modulation by somatic region. So the majority of patients who we work with who have a somatic component, it's related to the temporomandibular joint or the jaw muscles and the head and neck, so upper cervical spine. Although I've had patients that I've worked with over the years who are able to modulate their tinnitus with eye movement or eye gaze or actual movement of their arms or legs. So there's lots of different body networks that are involved in the somatosensory component, and it plays a big part in overall treatment plan. So if that is something that somebody has, it has to be addressed too. Research shows that 35 to 40% of tinnitus patients report a somatic component to their tinnitus. The treatment recommendations and referral to specialists depends, on the anatomic location of the somatic input. So if it's jaw related, we're referring to a dentist or a TMJ specialist. If it's upper cervical spine, potentially referral to PT or a physical therapist who specializes or focuses on that area to be able to help with realignment or reduced tension, whatever the issue is that's contributing to that tinnitus signal. And again, just as like a general statement, everything's connected. So if we're feeling super stressed and tense, anything we can do as part of that stress reduction strategy or pillar to kind of keep the entire system relaxed as possible is going to help with any somatic component as well. And then just to show you, this is a very scaled down, simplified version of the central auditory pathways. But essentially, there's research studies that show and can verify that, we have our peripheral auditory system, so our outer, middle, and inner ear, and then all these nuclei along the central auditory pathway up to the auditory cortex or the auditory part of of the brain. And then there's also this other network called the somatosensory network that feeds certain neural firings or neural activity from this particular system feed into a specific nuclei in the central auditory pathway. So for those who have somatic tinnitus, there's this extra neural firing when there's already hyperactivity in the auditory pathway. The somatic piece, there's extra neural firing that feeds into this particular part of the auditory pathway, which then exacerbates that tinnitus. So we know that for those who have a somatosensory component, addressing that will likely help to reduce just the overall intensity of the tinnitus. It's not typically a cure-all, but it's part of the treatment plan. And again, framing it out and understanding which areas to focus on. For those who have a somatosensory component, it's a primary area of focus. So our treatment modules, we have a curriculum that's built around those 4 pillars that I just kind of reviewed. It's a comprehensive approach to the treatment and management of tinnitus and all of the coexisting conditions that we know patients have to manage on a day-to-day basis in addition to the sound itself. So several different modules. Our providers can kind of pick and choose. They can personalize and customize it based on each of the patient's individual needs, again, depending on what areas they are really having the most challenge with. And then in addition to the one-on-one sessions, we have homework and activities in between sessions that help to kind of continue building that skill, right? To continue building those skills and capacity around some of those 4 pillars. Keeping patients an active participant in this is really important, right? They are part of the process and a very crucial part of the process. And then in addition to the one-on-one, patients have access to unlimited email and text with their provider. We also do twice-a-month group coaching, which I think has been fantastic for community building. And I mean, look at, all of you are here today. I think that that's a huge piece of feeling like you have support, and it's different. Peer-to-peer support is different from individual, one-on-one sessions with a provider. And I think they're both very beneficial. And then extended learning opportunities like this summit today. Hazel mentioned the Tinnitus Functional Index, not being a huge fan, for randomized clinical trials. I agree, there's a huge need for objective measures in tinnitus, like so much of tinnitus is subjective. And so I 100% agree with her on that. Clinically, this is not a research trial. Clinically, we use this in practice because I think out of all the different scales that are available, it does help with giving us more detailed information, more insight into, again, specific areas that are really affecting patients. And the more you can break it down, the more you can come up with a game plan that's going to work for each individual person. So the TFI, that questionnaire, the total score you can get is 100. So it's a 0 to 100 scale. Here's the ranges, right? 0 to 17, not a problem, down to 73 out of 100. Tinnitus is a very severe catastrophic problem. Hazel mentioned this earlier in her talk, that a change in score of 13 points is considered clinically significant. And then you can break it out even further into these subscales. So you get your total score, and then you also get these additional subscales. And again, you can see these kind of align with the 4 pillars. So you have, emotional distress, quality of life, relaxation, sleep, sense of control, intrusiveness. And you'll see variations on these subscales. You can have lots of patients who have the same total score, but when you do the breakout of the subscales, you'll see, wow, this person has a significant issue related to sense of control or intrusiveness, or this person has a significant issue related to their auditory system or quality of life. And so it helps us to, again, give insight, and it's a great counseling tool to work with the patient on as well, to sort of help them navigate and understand kind of what's going on and why we're working on certain areas in the order that we're working on them. So internally we use this to track our patient outcome data. Again, this is not a scientific, peer-reviewed research, but I think it helps to sort of keep us on track, helps us to understand, okay, how are we doing in terms of working with our patients? So 173 patients that we've worked with, that we measure the TFI at the beginning of treatment and 3 months later, and every 3 months after that. The average initial TFI score was 62.4, indicating that tinnitus is a severe problem. Average reduction in TFI was 21.5 points within 3 months of starting treatment. 80% of total patients who have completed 2 TFI questionnaires had a clinically significant reduction of at least 13 points or more within 3 months of starting treatment. And on average, patients work with our providers for about 3 to 6 months before sort of graduating or improving to the point where they no longer need those one-on-one. We have many patients who work with us for much longer than that too. I think the takeaway from this is that within whatever time frame it is that you're working on your habituation, the progress is happening throughout. So it's slow and steady, always slower than patients want, always slower than we would like as well for our patients, but it's happening. And so slow and steady wins the race there. And then, sorry, I'm a bit over time. I just want to go over one case study just to highlight how we actually implement the 4 pillars. So we have patient JM, tinnitus onset in December 2020, volume at an 8 out of 10. He had seen primary care, audiology, ENT, had an MRI and a CT to rule out any underlying medical cause, major negative impact on his sleep, major anxiety and stress, difficulty with focus and concentration at work, withdrawal from his family and friends, tried a bunch of prescription and over-the-counter medications for sleep and anxiety. And he didn't start working with us until almost 2 years into having his tinnitus. Started working with us in September 2022. Initial TFI score was 62, so indicating that his tinnitus was a severe problem for him. And then this is what we did in terms of using the 4 pillars for working with this patient. So sound, right? The first pillar, evaluated and reviewed what he had tried so far regarding sound therapy, how he was implementing it. So he was using it very intermittently. There was no plan. There was no sort of protocol or guidelines as far as how he was using it. We fit him with treble maskers, our ear level devices, customized the sound therapy program specifically for him and his tinnitus and the characteristics of his tinnitus to maximize and streamline the effectiveness. Added additional sound therapy strategies to supplement that ear level sound therapy. For example, using sound therapy for sleep via a sound pillow and a sleep headband. And then education and learning module around that sound exposure, sort of noise exposure guidelines to address and mitigate underlying fear of sound, making the tinnitus worse. For sleep, we evaluated and reviewed his current sleep routine and identified several areas for improvement, created a new sleep hygiene, a sleep routine that he followed on a daily basis. And we tweaked it as we went along, depending on how things were going and what was working and what wasn't working. And then an additional sound therapy plan specifically for nighttime. Stress reduction, that pillar, we were working on CBT techniques and exercises and activities that were practiced during the individual sessions and then in between sessions to promote that neuroplasticity that's talked about a lot related to tinnitus and that neutral categorization of the tinnitus signal over time and additional stress reduction techniques and a consistent schedule of implementing those to help with that overall stress reduction. And then he did not have a somatosensory component to his tinnitus, so we didn't need to address that piece. And his most recent TFI score as of January 2023 is an 8. So it started as 62, volume tinnitus at an 8 out of 10, January 2023, TFI score of 8, and tinnitus volume, subjective volume at a 1 to 2. I just want to end on this. So, and I don't know if Dr. Suzanne's on here. I can't see who's on, but I have to give her credit for sharing this with our team. I love this picture. So with tinnitus and trying to kind of go through and do treatment and manage it and everything, it often feels like, I think for a lot of patients, that you're just kind of going around and around in a circle, right? You're not making any movement in any direction. It just feels like you're going nowhere. If we start to shift our perspective, if we start to look at it differently, if we start to think about it differently, and as we're moving along, implementing these strategies, building upon these skills, what's actually happening is that you are making progress, right? It's slow and steady progress towards where you eventually ultimately want to be, which is stage 4, where your tinnitus is, rarely noticed, and reaction to it is extremely minimal. And so that is our ultimate goal in working with any patient with Treble Health. So with that, I know I'm over. So my email's up there. Thank you so much for joining today. And feel free to email me with any further questions or comments. And
thank you, Dr. Tracy.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So everyone who's here, I just started a poll. If you can find that poll section of your Zoom, either on your phone or on Zoom, you should be receiving that poll right now. The question is, have you had a free consultation, a tinnitus relief discovery call with Treble Health before? It is something that we are offering for you who are attending this live session with Dr. Tracy for free. There was a ton of amazing questions, Tracy, in the chat, and fortunately we had multiple audiologists helping out. So for those of you who still have personalized one-on-one questions that are going to help you move forward with your tinnitus towards better relief, we are offering a free consultation with Treble Health. We'll drop that link in the chat right now. If you need help with that, you let us know, you contact us, or you can go in the chat right now and sign up for that free consultation. We just have time for one or two more questions, Dr. Tracy, if you're available for that. And so far from the poll, 68% of individuals have not had a one-on-one call with us. We do provide this service and it's available for you guys. The first question, Tracy, is for individuals who had further questions about which sound therapy to use. One of our members of the audience asked, I find that ocean waves are comfortable, but is white noise better? They're new to sound therapy. What would you recommend for them?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? You see white noise, that's kind of the gold standard that you'll see online. I think that it is a matter of finding out more specific detail on like each person's specific tinnitus and the characteristics, right? So we're looking for a few different parameters around what types of sounds are going to work best for sound therapy for each individual. So we're looking for sounds that do a great job of mixing our tinnitus in. So certainly we want to get some relief from the perception of that signal all the time, because that helps to calm the nervous system down and helps to kind of get that process going of habituation to begin with. Secondly, we're looking for sounds that are hopefully to the patient relaxing and soothing. And so if white noise is something that starts to kind of irritate you, then that's not a sound that we want to use. We need to pivot to finding something that's going to sound a little bit more relaxing to the individual, right? So nature sounds, more music-based sounds. There are so many options now, in addition to, what it was like when I first started. So it's wonderful. You can find a sound that will work, or a combination of sounds that will work for each person. It's a little bit of trial and error. So you have to sort of understand that there's a process that one goes through. And the third thing is that you want the sound to be a background sound. So this process of sound therapy really is meant to be passive. We don't want patients to be using a sound that actually draws their attention more to the tinnitus. We want the sound that we're using to be something that's sort of low level background, but doing a good job of blending the tinnitus in. So if white noise isn't doing it for you, then it's about trying to find a different type of sound or sounds that's going to kind of hit on all of those different parameters.
Excellent. And then the last question here was a follow-up for those who have noticed that sounds like dishes clanking, running water, people's voices sound different, perhaps too sensitive. This is a condition that we call sound sensitivity or hyperacusis. The question is, how do you approach hyperacusis, just in a general sense, for the patient who has tinnitus and hyperacusis who's looking for help?
Yeah. So for patients who have both, and you saw from the talk that there's quite a large percentage of patients who report both sound sensitivity and tinnitus. If there's both, the hypersensitivity or hyperacusis has to be addressed first. And so in order to kind of rebuild your auditory system's tolerance to being able to take in a certain amount of auditory input, we want to be able to go through that process first. So how you do the sound therapy protocol is quite different than sort of strict tinnitus retraining therapy or sound therapy. And so that's more of a schedule, it's more of a buildup. And then at a certain point, when your auditory system is able to tolerate more normal levels of sound, then we can shift to working and focusing more on the tinnitus itself. Sometimes as a byproduct of doing a sound sensitivity protocol or sound desensitization protocol, the tinnitus is also patients are getting relief from that. But if not, we sort of do it in an order to make sure that we're appropriately treating both.
Excellent. Well, let's give a big thank you to Dr. Tracy Peck Holcomb, who had a wonderful presentation with us and who is an audiologist working with tinnitus patients every day. There's one last quick lightning round question. The question is, Dr. Tracy, once you reach stage 4 of habituation, do we ever go back to stage 1 or 2? What happens once I reach stage 4?
Great question. So we do know there are imaging studies. There needs to be more, but there are imaging studies using functional MRI or PET scan showing that we have, by stage 4, you have changed those neural connections in the brain. So you've created new neural connections that have recategorized or shifted that tinnitus to being a neutral, non-important signal. So typically when someone reaches stage 4, they maintain that level of tinnitus habituation ongoing. So I think that's a common question that comes up. But once you've gotten to that point, it doesn't like flip-flop back typically.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tracy, and your presentation was excellent. I'm going to now show on my screen the schedule for the rest of the day. And for those of you who are here with us, stick around, because later today we're going to have Dr. Pavel Jastreboff, who was listening to the presentations this afternoon, or this morning, wherever you are. So welcome, Dr. Jastreboff. We're going to have a break for some hours, and then coming up at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, we'll have Dr. Jastreboff on the history of tinnitus retraining therapy and why it's still a leading treatment for tinnitus, followed by myself, Ben Thompson, with Treble Health. I will present on the evidence-based tinnitus treatment that I learned from the best ENT doctors in the world. So this is our schedule. Hope to see you guys later. It's going to be the same Zoom link, and come with any questions you have. As always, if you need one-on-one personalized support with tinnitus, you can have a one-on-one discovery call with an audiologist on our team. All you have to do is go to treblehealth.com to sign up for that. And we hope to see you tonight. Thanks so much, Dr. Tracy.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.